First of all, it has to analyze correctly why we've had an impasse.
I think that most of the action in Pyongyang already happened, and I don't think we're going to learn that much by sending inspectors there.
Would they continue this discussion, trading declaration with declaration?
I hope they don't simply go back to the same positions that have led to an impasse.
The two are not completely in sync on the timing of sanctions relief.
And I think there have been some fissures that have developed recently. We have to repair those if we want to have success.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he has made real progress during his fourth visit to North Korea. How can the U.S. build on this progress and prepare for a successful second summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim?
I returned late last night from North Korea from a trip where we made real progress.
My guest today, Mr. Frank Jannuzi, president of the Mansfield Foundation and former advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Also joining us, Mr. Robert Einhorn, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Mr. Einhorn was a former special advisor for non-proliferation and arms control at the State Department. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Thank you.
If any one of you can start us off, President Trump said the second summit with Kim Jong-un will come after the midterm elections, so we have about a month to go. How can the United States best prepare for a successful second summit?
Well, it could do a number of things. First of all, it has to analyze correctly why we've had an impasse since Singapore. It's a complicated matter, but we've been pushing a proposal. The North Koreans have been pushing another proposal, and we haven't been able to have a breakthrough. I think we have to analyze why, and perhaps look for some adjustments in our approach. Not necessarily big concessions by the United States, but altering our approach a bit. Because I've found if you keep banging your head on the wall the same way constantly, you're not gonna achieve any useful result. I think also a key to progress is to ensure that the United States and the ROK remain in lockstep. We have to be unified, and I think there have been some fissures that have developed recently. We have to repair those if we want to have success.
I think Bob's right, and I would just add that right now the United States has been so reluctant to move toward a declaration ending the Korean War, and I think for understandable reasons, we worry that it takes all of the heat off North Korea to really make progress on denuclearization. But at the same time, I think the North Koreans are looking for some form of acknowledgement of the steps that they've taken so far, however modest they may be. So I think at this next summit meeting, we need to see some real progress on both the end of war declaration, as well as more concrete steps on getting inspectors in and beginning to curtail North Korea's nuclear activities. And I think that's what Steve Biegun and his counterpart, Chae Sung-hui, will likely work on in the weeks between now and the next summit.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned about Steve Biegun, Representative Biegun and Vice Foreign Minister Chae Sun-hee's meeting. Secretary Pompeo, while in Pyongyang, reportedly had heated discussion with the North Koreans on how they could trade the end of war declaration with the nuclear declaration list. So when Representative Biegun and Vice Foreign Minister Chae meet again, would they continue this discussion of trading declaration with declaration?
I hope not. I hope they don't simply go back to the same positions that have led to an impasse. I hope they would show some greater creativity. The problem, of course, when Madam Chae and Steve Biegun meet is that on the North Korean side, only one person can speak for North Korea, and that's Chairman Kim Jong-un. And so Madam Che will not have much flexibility there. I think hopefully they can explore some solutions. They can deal with logistical questions, such as where and when the second summit will be held. But it's going to be difficult for them to achieve major breakthroughs on the key issues.
Although it may also be the case that on the U.S. side, only one person's voice really matters, and that's Donald Trump. But I agree that if we can put some creative ideas on the table, a little bit more innovative diplomacy, then the Vice Foreign Minister from North Korea can take those ideas back to her government. One idea I've been kicking around with colleagues is that the United States and North Korea could convene a peace conference in concert with South Korea and China, sort of a way of taking the end-of-war declaration and establishing a preliminary step to designate representatives to sit down together and start to really seriously work through the issues associated with a peace declaration. This would show meaningful progress toward the end of the war without committing the United States to a piece of paper in advance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very good idea. If you have difficulty with issues, one approach is to break them down into smaller issues and try to make some progress. I think rather than going directly to a major end-of-war declaration, having a conference such as Frank suggested would be a good idea. Another way of breaking a big problem down into smaller problems is to look at the U.S. proposal for a comprehensive North Korean declaration of its inventory and locations of nuclear weapons, fissile materials, long-range missiles, and so forth. I don't think that the North Koreans are going to do that. A first very important step would be to propose that North Korea suspend all production of fissile material and to declare the location of all facilities that produce fissile material, not just at Yongbyon, but outside of Yongbyon, anywhere in North Korea. So declare the location of those facilities and permit inspectors to go and verify a suspension at those facilities. That would not reveal the numbers or location of North Korean nuclear weapons, missiles. It would be more acceptable, I think, to the North, but it would be a very important first step toward denuclearization.
I want to talk about inspections. North Korea promised Secretary Pompeo that it will invite international inspections to Punggye nuclear test site. Now, would the inspectors be able to gain knowledge of North Korea's overall nuclear programs, or just be there simply confirming the dismantlement of the facility?
Well, look, they're going to get a little bit of scientific knowledge. If they're allowed to bring instruments and take samples, they may gain some deeper clarity about the yield of the various nuclear tests. They may also be able to determine a bit better the structural integrity of the Punggye-ri test site. But I think that most of the action in Punggye-ri already happened, and I don't think we're going to learn that much by sending inspectors there. Symbolically, it's important, though, just to get qualified inspectors on the ground at a nuclear site. That's better than nothing.
Mr. Einhorn, what conditions should be met for this inspection team to be successful and set a good precedent for future inspections in North Korea?
Well, I think one has to look at what the purpose of this inspection is. It's to confirm the irreversible dismantlement of the nuclear test site. And I think the expertise you need to do that confirmation is very different from the expertise you would need, for example, to verify that a enrichment facility has been shut down. You'd want geologists, you'd want who understand how a previous nuclear explosion could collapse the mountain on top of the test site. They would be able to know whether the dynamiting of the entrances would have a fundamental impact on making it difficult to resume testing at that facility. So I don't think it really sets an important precedent for the future. This is going to be a one-time visit, but verifying denuclearization is a full-time and constant and repetitive process.
Mr. Einhorn, how is North Korea now different from North Korea you dealt with directly when you were engaged in the agreed framework and the missile negotiations back in the 1990s?
I think North Korea has become much more sophisticated in its understanding of the United States. I've met in the last few years on a kind of track 1.5 basis with Madam Che and her colleagues, and I'm very impressed, especially with the young people she brings. These are people who speak perfect English, who have read all of the literature in the United States, understand American politics much better than the North Koreans did a couple of decades ago when they were quite naive about American politics.
Mr. Jannuzi, how would the results of the November midterm elections impact the ongoing nuclear negotiations with North Korea?
Well, I expect that the November results will not have a significant impact, and the reason for that is that the Congress does not want to take possession of this issue, nor do they want to stand in the way of a diplomatic effort to resolve the North Korean nuclear crisis.
Last question. South Korean President Moon Jae-in had an interview with BBC today, and he said that signing of the end of war declaration is only a matter of time because North Korea promised to remove all its existing nuclear materials and nuclear weapons. What is your reaction to his thinking?
Yes, he's made that promise, but it's not clear what it means. Singapore, Kim Jong-un committed to work toward complete denuclearization. Now, I'm working toward playing golf like Tiger Woods. Now, I'm going to be working toward that goal for the rest of my life. And I think Kim Jong-un probably looks at his commitment on working toward complete denuclearization in the same way.
So what would make the end of war declaration more acceptable to the United States?
Well, a concern in Washington about the end of war declaration is that the North Koreans and likely the Chinese would use it to pursue their long-term objective of ending the US-ROK security alliance and removing US military forces from the Korean peninsula. That's a real concern. I think sometimes it's an exaggerated concern, but it's real. So how do you deal with that? One idea I've had is, in parallel with any end-of-war declaration, to issue at the same time a U.S. ROK high-level statement, maybe at the heads of government level, that reaffirms the importance of the U.S. ROK security alliance and the importance of maintaining U.S. military forces in South Korea, even after peace is declared, even after a peace treaty is ultimately achieved. I think having that declaration would be very reassuring to the American public and to many people in South Korea who would be very anxious at the possibility that the alliance would be weakened and that American forces would be removed.
And also reassuring to the Japanese as well.
So we'll end our first discussion here and watch video for our next topic. President Trump says South Korea will not lift its unilateral sanctions on North Korea without U.S. approval. This is in response to South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa's remarks that Seoul is considering lifting sanctions imposed on the North in 2010 following a deadly attack on warship Cheonan. Now, Is this the best time to announce that Seoul is considering lifting sanctions on North Korea?
Well, I think it goes to Bob's earlier point. The U.S. and South Korea need to coordinate very closely, and I think there are some warning signs that the two are not completely in sync on the timing of sanctions, relief, or other incentives to the North. But I also feel like President Trump's comment maybe is taken a little bit out of context. When he says that South Korea won't move without U.S. approval, I think what he really meant was we are coordinating, we're going to move together, and we're going to do our very best to remain in sync with each other.
I wasn't happy to hear President Trump's comment about South Korea can't do anything without our approval. That's not the way you speak with one of our closest and most trusted allies. I think the ROK needs to have considerable independence in pursuing its inter-Korean policy agenda. But at this moment, when there's an impasse between the U.S. and the DPRK, an impasse on denuclearization, I don't think it's the right time, actually, to initiate any major steps, such as the removal of unilateral ROK sanctions against North Korea. I think there has to be very, very close consultation and transparency. And transparency is a two-way street.
We've been hearing about South Korea going too fast on reconciliation with North Korea when there's no progress on denuclearization. So wouldn't this a show of accumulated frustration on the part of President Trump that South Korea is maybe going too fast?
I think there is a concern in the United States that the ROK may be going a bit too fast. And again, it would be one thing if these steps were taken in the context of movement toward denuclearization. It's another thing if they're taking place essentially in a vacuum, and that's the concern.
Mm-hmm. How serious is the current fissure between Seoul and Washington?
Well, I think it's definitely repairable, and I think that it's not new that there would be some tension between Washington and Seoul on how best to manage North Korea. And especially when things are moving a little bit on North-South reconciliation efforts, it's natural that President Moon would try to accelerate those efforts. It's paying dividends for him politically at home, and he wants to lock in progress and try to bring the North along.
Mr. Einhorn, wouldn't North Korea take advantage of the growing fissure between Seoul and Washington?
Yes, they will. I think they will try to widen that difference as much as possible. And they will not be alone. I think the Chinese also would be happy to see the U.S. and ROK allies moving farther apart. Success in dealing with all of these issues requires unity between Washington and Seoul. It's absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll end this conversation here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today we have a photo of a Wi-Fi service provided in the lobby of the Botonggang Hotel in Pyongyang. This photo is taken by the Pyongyang bureau chief of the Associated Press. The approved users at the hotel can gain the hidden online access after they type in the Wi-Fi name specifically and the password. Frank, what's your reaction?
Well, I stayed at the Botonggang on one of my visits to North Korea, and there was no Wi-Fi service of any kind. So this is certainly an improvement, and I would hope that foreigners who visit the Botonggang Hotel will enjoy it. One of the things that interests me about all forms of electronic communication with the North is that although they are typically designed for foreigners and tightly controlled, North Koreans also know those passwords. So I expect a little bit of cultural pollution and information may be leaking into North Korea more than in the past.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Einhorn?
It's obviously positive if North Koreans have access to the internet, but when I look at this picture, I ask myself, which sites have been blacked out. Which sites, that would be very interesting to know which sites authorities felt were so subversive that people couldn't view them. Also, obviously, anyone who uses this Wi-Fi is being monitored very closely by North Korean authorities.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Einhorn, Mr. Jannuzi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun Jung Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.